Hello, everybody. This is Mark Gilbert. I'm one of the board members and a key researcher for the Science of Mind Archives. And it's my pleasure today to continue our Wise Sage interview series. And I'm blessed to be able to interview today Reverend Dr. Lloyd Barrett, who was one of my teachers back in the day and very instrumental in my spiritual path. This whole series for the Wise Sages offers us an opportunity to share with you some of the memories and thoughts, hopes and dreams of some of the people who've been key in furthering the message of science of mind along on the planet. So today, like I said, we're speaking with the Reverend Dr. Lloyd Barrett. Lloyd, thanks to having you here today. How are you doing?
It's a joy to be with you and just having an awareness of connecting with regards to the teachings of Dr. Ernest Holmes. It's magnificent, and thank you, Dr. Mark, for facilitating this.
Well, thank you very much. And let's start out sort of in a chronological way. Maybe you can tell the viewers a little bit about your early life, when and where you were born, and some of the origins of your family and your religious background.
Well, thank you. I was born in Jamaica, about 12 or 14 miles from Montego Bay. As a little boy, I was not one of the brightest. At that time, Jamaica was under the British rule, so many teachers thought they could predict the outcome of students. And I mentioned this because at about age 11, a teacher told my mother, "This boy will never be able to make it to college, Mrs. Barrett." And I clearly remember my mother squeezing my hand and saying to the teacher, "This boy will be a minister or a doctor one day." and of course, the teacher was, the word that comes to my mind, very chagrined. She thought, this is impossible. Anyway, my mother began assigning poems to me, everything from very positive poems. If I might just share a brief one, probably about between the age 11 and 12, one entitled "Be the Best of Whoever You Are." And a couple of lines says, "If you cannot be the pine on the top of a hill, be the shrub in the valley, but be the best little shrub by the side of the hill." Anyway, she would assign those to me and have me rehearse them to present them verbatim, either at the Presbyterian church where my dad was the elder, or she built her own church under the auspices of the Yahweh movement. And then at about age 18, I received a scholarship to a Baptist college in St. Augustine, Florida. A work scholarship. In other words, I had to maintain a B average and work consistently, everything from working in the library, the cafeteria, at the home of the college president. And then I graduated from college with a degree in education. But my intention was to return to Jamaica because in 1961, and beyond, my dad was a councilman in Montego Bay, and in 1962 he was the mayor of Montego Bay when Jamaica became independent from the British. So I still have pictures of my dad walking in his mayoral garb or garment in Montego Bay beside then Vice President Lyndon Johnson. So I felt very proud of that and thought I was going to return to Jamaica to work in education. However, I felt I needed a master's degree, and I went to Butler University in Indianapolis with regards to completing a master's degree. 6 hours before completing that degree, I opted out, decided to work for Pabst Brewing Company. And I sold beer in 11 states and Washington, D.C., during which time I was married in Indianapolis for 5 years, and my wife died of sickle cell anemia. being devastated emotionally at age 30, the brewery called me to Milwaukee and asked if I would be interested to be transferred to Los Angeles. I objected. They were very patient with me. They asked me to reconsider, invited me back to Milwaukee, and basically made me an offer that was very hard to refuse. They made me an offer that if I went to Los Angeles and worked as a Pabst Brewery representative with a territory of Southern Nevada, Western Arizona, and Southern California, they would pay my room and board for 6 months in Los Angeles. And if I did not like it, return to Indiana and receive my previous positions. I was so elated, I started singing California, Here I Come. And of course, that is where I became aware of the teachings of Science of Mind. A vice president of sales gave me a phone number indicating that this person had been to college with him. I called this lady. She was very formal. And she, young man, do you attend any church? I must be honest with you. I was about 30 years old and a little giddy. I said, ma'am, I attend C&E. She said very seriously, young man, I have heard of CME Methodist. Now, what is a C&E? And I proudly proclaimed Christmas and Easter. She was not happy at all because she was a very serious person. However, she reminded me or informed me that there was this very positive church near downtown Los Angeles, and we agreed to meet. I arrived there in 1969, about late June, and I had never heard of Science of Mind before. I had never attended a church where people wore Bermuda shorts, because coming up in Jamaica, even if it's 99 degrees, people have coats and hats and ties. And there were 2 services at that time at Founders Church. People like Helen Reddy, Doris Day, the person who played Marcus Welby, MD. And there were 2 services, approximately 1,500 each. I was astonished at how packed the church was. I had never heard of this teaching, but I kept going, and I never missed a Wednesday night if I was in the city, or a Sunday. I kept going, and I was intrigued with the theme, the mind is creative. Also, Dr. William Hornaday, who was the minister at that time, he ultimately did my wedding in July of 1971, but that's another long story. So I don't know if that's adequate introduction, but that's what I recall up to this point.
You've not only done an adequate introduction, you've run through the next few questions that I had, Lloyd. So, but I would say, you mentioned William Hornaday. Was he one of your teachers, or who were some of your early Science of Mind teachers and some of the instrumental people that?
Well, Dr. Hornaday was the minister at Founders, but I never started. I went to some workshops at Founders Church. For instance, Norman Cousins, who was a professor in the UCLA medical staff. I remember attending a workshop at Founders on a Saturday morning with over 1,000 people. And that was my first time of seeing how meditation, deep breathing, and music lowered blood pressure. One of the strategies, so to speak, that they implemented, they randomly took the blood pressure reading of people in the audience. Then soft music was played, deep breathing was suggested, affirmations such as, my body respond to the intelligence of the divine, and various positive, affirmative thoughts. For instance, one of the thoughts by Ernest Holmes as follows: my body is an instrument in, through, and upon which life is playing its perfect harmony. And so I was pleasantly astonished when, after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, almost all the people's blood pressure reading went down 15 to 20 points. And that intrigued me so much that when we bought a home in Long Beach, I started attending Science of Mind classes, but that did not start until 1980. I just kept going to church and going to workshops, but did not formally start classes until September 1980 with Dr. Guy Lorraine, who was the minister in Long Beach, California.
Very good. Well, how did you find that Science of Mind changed your life? Were there any moments or outstanding demonstrations or life events that really said, this is the philosophy for me and it's directed where my life is going?
Yeah, there are so many, Dr. Mark. Now, the first one you might find intriguing. Here is what happened. Since I was transferred to Los Angeles to promote and sell beer, and since at that time I was single, everyone, a female I met, the first question they asked was, what sign are you? And I had no clue what they were referring to. So I thought, since the Science of Mind teaching by Dr. Hornaday was emphasizing the mind is creative, and since all these women were asking me, what sign are you? And since the brewery sent me there to sell beer, I thought, why don't I start organizing and creating astrological beer parties? And intriguingly, that's how I met my wife. I went to a restaurant in South Central Los Angeles, and at that time, her sister was dating a gentleman who owned apartment buildings, a restaurant, a bar, and other places. And I proposed to him, let me use the company's expense account to begin an astrological beer party. And there was Shekinah. Of course, I had never met her, but since her sister was dating this bar owner, I introduced myself. And that was January of 1970. So you could say Science of Mind was the foundation, because ultimately the very first date with Shekinah was Easter Sunday, 1970 at Founders Church. Even though we met in January, I could never get a date. She didn't trust the beer salesman taking her out. So I thought, why don't I invite her to church with me? Here is an interesting point. We stood in line for 2 hours trying to get in church on Easter Sunday, 1970. And by the time we got into the sanctuary that seated about 1,500, it was overcrowded, so they placed us in the chapel. And she was not happy about that. In fact, she said to me, if I knew I had to sit in the basement of a church on Easter Sunday, I would have happily stayed home. However, when she heard Dr. Hornaday beginning to speak, she moved to the edge of her seat and said to me, well, I don't know what this is, but I want to hear some more of it. And that was the clincher. A year later, we were married upstairs in Dr. Hornaday's office. So that worked.
and that's wild. And did you both start taking classes at the same time, or when did you become a practitioner, and how did you and become a minister?
Yes. Well, I had an intriguing wife in many respects, but she grew up in a Methodist home. As a matter of fact, when I told her I was about to enter ministerial school, this is a fact, she literally fell out on the floor in Long Beach in our home and said, "Oh no," and used the biblical thought, "The thing I have feared the most has come upon me." I said, "What are you saying?" She said, "I grew up saying I'll never marry a minister." I said, "Well, you marry a beer salesman who became a minister." So, and it's because she grew up with an aunt who at various times were married to two ministers. So she felt that she did not want that. So fast forward, I began taking Science of Mind classes in September 1980, completed my practitioner work, and then entered Ernest Holmes College and graduated from Ernest Holmes College in Los Angeles in 1987. There were 19 of us in that class.
And where all did you serve after you became a minister?
My first church was El Centro, California. El Centro was about 22 miles in from Mexicali, Mexico, and approximately 130 miles east on Interstate 8 from San Diego, about 130 miles east on Interstate 8. It was a highly significant agricultural area. At that time, Imperial County, in which El Centro is located, was listed within the top 10 most significant agricultural areas in the country. It was not unusual for someone that invited us for dinner, a farmer, to say, "Well, Reverend Lloyd, if my asparagus crop do as well as it's going to do, I'm going to build a new tennis court." Or, "Reverend Lloyd, if my melon crop do as much as I think it's going to do, I'm going to add to my maid quarters." So the agricultural area was very significant. You might enjoy the story. I recall a farmer asking me and my wife if I would like a few onions. In that area, they grew Imperial Valley sweet onions. Sometimes some of those onions were the size of a small saucer. Well, I told this farmer, yes, we would like a few onions. One Sunday morning, I arrived in the social hall and I saw this huge bag of onions. So I thought, oh, they're having a sale. I didn't know they were having sale of produce in the store. At the ending of the service, I asked, well, whose onions are those? The farmer said, "It's yours, Reverend." I said, 50 pounds of onions? I'm not selling. So they did the same thing with asparagus. So anyway, that was my first church. And on a more introspective note, I learned to listen to the divine more intently. A case in point, that particular church had 7 ministers in 12 years. I sat in the silence, inviting Infinite Mind to share with me, how do I solidify confidence within the community, the congregation? And an intuitive voice said, "Lloyd, are you aware of joy calls?" And I literally opened my eyes saying, "Joy calls? I've never heard of it." And the intuitive assignment was, make very brief calls to all the people on your list in the church community without asking for anything. An example of a joy call: "Hello, This is Reverend Lloyd. You are designed for a magnificent day. Let's know that all your good is being multiplied. And I would leave a message like that, or if the person was alive, speak to them. Frequently, they would ask, why are you calling? I said, I'm calling to offer a joyful day. It was not unusual for them to appear shocked and saying, are you sure you didn't want anything? I said, yes, I want you to be happy. And frequently they would say, well, no minister had ever called us before and didn't want something. I said, well, I do want something. I want your joy to be multiplied. And so that was my first community, El Centro, California. And I was there from August of 1988 until October 1992, at which time I left. I went to Escondido, California, and was in Escondido, California until 1999. I don't know if you want me to share some of the amazing breakthroughs that I saw further.
Do so, yes, please do so.
Yes. Well, I have sometimes in the silence, introspectively, I asked the universe, what was it about this community to which I was guided? Now, this was not a complaint. It was like, I call it an investigation of consciousness. That's what I tell myself. For instance, before going to Escondido, they told me the community had financial challenges. However, I did not ask about the detail of the financial challenge, other than they had asked me to take what they referred to as a $900 monthly pay reduction. The interesting thing was, every time I sat in the silence for prayer, treatment, and affirmation, my feeling, my heart said go, and my wife was ready to leave El Centro, but every time I would write the figures down, it was a strong no. So there I was, the intuition said go, my wife said go, but all the facts said no. I went with the intuition and my wife's suggestion. When I arrived, I found out they were $5,000 in arrears with the rent, which they had not told me and I hadn't asked, and they were not able to pay the current $2,500 a month. Meeting with the leadership, they said nothing could be done. And I said, I don't know, Dr. Mark, if you want to include this, but I'll share what I did. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I came here for the resurrection. I didn't come here for the funeral. So I thought, well, as Einstein said, we cannot change a situation with the same consciousness that created it. That being so, I felt it was no use asking the board that felt nothing could be done to go up to Anaheim to talk to the ownership of the property from which we were leasing. So I asked a man who was not even a member of the church. And that particular morning at 4 a.m., I remember asking my wife, let's do a spiritual mind treatment and some affirmations, because we're asking someone that's not even a member to go up to Anaheim to see what could be done to have a better financial situation on behalf of the church. Amazingly, I still remember 2 p.m. that day, the man returned with a letter forgiving the church of the $5,000 and reducing the rent to $1,500. That was one of the most amazing breakthroughs. There were many others, but that was the beginning, because it reminds me, I think it's Dr. John Randolph Price that said, nothing is impossible to happen and nothing is too good to be true. Along those lines, Dr. Mark, it also reminds me of Dr. Ernest Holmes' statement when he said, we must keep our minds clear so that when Spirit bring our gifts, we are ready to receive them. And I'm so grateful that we kept the mind clear so that this manifestation could be observed and appreciated.
That's a wonderful story, Dr. Lloyd. And then in 1999, you moved on.
With 1999, I was invited by Dr. Roger Teal to join the staff at Mile High Church. It was an amazing experience because coming from California, where at the most in Escondido, sometimes I had an attendance of 100, and here I'm invited to go to Colorado, where I remember when I left in 2013, the attendance was up to sometimes 3,000 people per Sunday. Of course, as you probably know, there were at least, from my memory, 7 ministers active on the payroll. And it was an amazing experience. When I first went there, my assignment was significantly all the various groups and the youth department. Now, over the years, my responsibility changed, including being the chaplain, including being the dean of Holmes Institute. I had various roles at different times. And it was an amazing thing to see how infinite mind, how the divine presence revealed itself, certainly on my behalf, but also on the behalf of the communities. I don't know how much detail you might like with regards to any specific situation.
Well, if you've got any stories that come to mind that you'd love to share, we certainly would love to hear them.
Well, one of them that, thank you so much, Dr. Mark. One that comes to mind was that when I first arrived, I asked Dr. Roger, after I observed that there were children coming to Mile High from they were babies until they graduated from high school. So I asked him, what's currently being done for a child who has been there? Were they being given like a book? Were they being taken out for lunch? Did they receive a congratulatory card? At that time in 1999, basically it was none of the above. I thought, well, we ought to do something. So I began suggesting, for instance, having a graduate select one of Science of Mind, one of the books from Ernest Holmes, such as This Thing Called You, This Thing Called Life, or books such as that. An example, a few weeks after, a young lady came to me and said, Reverend Lloyd, you know, I don't really get along with my dad, but I took home This Thing Called You, and I can't get to read it because my dad is reading it. And then one of the amazing breakthroughs, a young lady came to me and said, you've been talking a lot about what you would like to do with the and for the youth department, including having funds for giving a check to a person who has completed high school. And so she said, I would like to talk to you about more of that kind of a goal. I did not know what she had in mind. To be honest, it took a lot of faith, because once per month, we kept talking and praying and visioning, some of it including having someone to take the kids hiking, or at that time, we did not have anyone taking the kids to skiing or rafting. So we started looking at that, and we started doing things gradually. Well, after a year, by that time, Mile High started its new fund for its new sanctuary. After several months, this particular young lady called me and said, Reverend Lloyd, are you going to be there after 5 o'clock today? I am willing to bring you a check for the youth department. I said, I'll wait. I waited, and after 5 p.m. that particular day, Dr. Mark, the young lady came in and she said, most people don't know that my dad transitioned and left me a significant amount of money. And based on what you've been sharing about your desires for Mile High and the youth department, I want to write a check. And she literally started trembling and saying, I have never written a check for this amount. She wrote a check that afternoon, that evening, for $40,000.
Wow.
The amazing thing, however, was by that time, the new sanctuary fund had started. But when we started our conversations several months earlier, we did not have a new sanctuary fund. So we divided that fund between the new sanctuary and 15,000 for the youth department. And at that time now we began, if a child participated in Mile High, like going to camp, helping to sell little wreaths and candles during the holiday, we would provide them like a check for $300, just as a way, or whatever the group decided on. But it was a way of giving encouragement, support. And at that time, because of the teachings of Science of Mind, I was also guided to write affirmative thoughts that encouraged and I hope to inspire youth. I want to digress and share a brief story. I don't know if you can use it, but it meant a lot to me and apparently to others. And this goes back to my first church when I saw 2 little boys in the church and there were no adults with them. I asked them, how did you get here? I'm happy to see you. They said, my dad told us to look in the yellow pages and pick out a church, and we picked this one out. So my dad bring us and drop us off and pick us up. I was so enthused, and sitting in the silence afterwards, I was guided to write something called the Champion's Prayer. We had a part-time secretary. They placed it on very attractive stationery, and I'll just share a piece of it, a part of it. The Champion's Prayer. I am a champion marching to the beat of success. In the parade of life, I march to the beat of possibilities, greatness, success, and I am exceptionally designed to achieve goals. In the parade of life and in the prayer of a championship, I erase all doubts and fears, and I keep marching to greater good. In other words, there is much more than this, but bottom line, I gave it to these young men. One was 7 years old and one was 9 at the time. And a few weeks later, the youngest one said, Reverend Lloyd, I read that Champion's Prayer and hit my first home run. I thought, oh, that's a prayer that's applicable. That's a workable prayer. A few weeks later, the other brother said, I read that Champion Prayer too, and I ran my first touchdown. I said, you're going to make me write more championship prayers. Now, here is an intriguing thing. That was about 1989. In 2009, in Colorado, one afternoon, the phone rang, and the young man said, are you the Reverend Lloyd that was in El Centro? My brother and I have been trying to find you. He lives in Hollywood, California, and I live in North Carolina, And we have been talking, saying we have not found any church that make us feel good like that one. And it was an amazing experience, Dr. Mark, because here it was about 20 years later, and we both, you could tell on the phone, were tearing up for joy because one thought back in when they were 7 and 9, and now 20 years later, they remembered. So that was quite impactful, certainly not egotistically, but it's a reminder of the power of a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Lloyd, since you've been retired, I'm assuming you're maintaining your spiritual practices. I think folks would be curious to know what your spiritual practices currently are. And
Wow, my spiritual practice right now, Dr. Mark, is, for instance, this morning at about 6 a.m., I have a prayer, 3 prayer partners, Reverend Marquita McAllister, who is here in Las Vegas, and Karen Karen Campbell, who is a practitioner in New York. This morning when we prayed, she was in Atlanta, Georgia with her mother. So that's one of my practices. I still, was it in the middle of July, for instance, I blessed a home in Missouri that someone asked me to bless. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, somebody was calling me, so I can't, I don't see my picture, but you probably, I don't know.
I can hear you, I can see you. Keep going.
Okay, all right. So anyway, so yes, I was asked to bless a home, and interestingly enough, that was the first time I ever blessed a home on the phone. I had always gone physically. I spend quite a bit of time still in the silence. Quite a bit of time. I still, I call it my work silent ministry, in that on Facebook, I try never to write a negative thought. I think it's important to emphasize this. When I was approaching age 65, I asked my wife, Shekinah, for a prayer and visioning session versus a physical series of birthday gifts. That visioning session took place in Lakewood, Colorado, in the home of a practitioner, Linda McDonald. Based on the feedback I received from the 7 participants in the visioning session, I was guided to summarize my spiritual purpose with the word THIS. My spiritual purpose: teach, heal, inspire, support. Mm-hmm. That's my spiritual purpose. And even without verbalizing it, it is activated because I get calls from Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, even early this morning from Georgia. I have another prayer partner I pray with in Georgia, Atlanta, every Tuesday and Thursday. A person I had never met, but we have been praying together for the last 15 months. So my spirit, and also I have been listening, even though I did the narration of the book, This Thing Called You, I listen to it very frequently because that's one of the amazing treasures written by Dr. Ernest Holmes. So there are many dimensions: silence, prayer work. Sometimes my spiritual practice also involves music. For instance, a certain Saturday or Sunday mornings, I listen for 2 hours to what I call my Beethoven moments. Beethoven concertos, or one of my favorite is the pastoral symphony, the Sixth Symphony. I might sit on my patio here in Las Vegas and look at the blue skies and the palm trees while listening to Beethoven's symphony, preferably the Sixth, but I also listen to others. So prayer work, reading, sacred music, and others.
And social media. And I get your positive statements on Facebook and appreciate them deeply. You know, throughout this discussion and your sharing today, you've obviously talked a lot about the impact that religious science and science of minds had not only on your life, but on the world and on the people that have been impacted by your teaching and working with them. What do you see as the future for science of mind and new thought in general?
Well, I think the possibility is endless. There, years ago, I do not remember the specific phrase, but it's almost as if we were saying it was a silent partner. If I had it my way, so to speak, and I am trying to do it when I send out. In addition to my Facebook page of Always Something Positive, I also do the same with about 75 people on my contact list about 3 times per week. I see the almost like a spiritual evolution, and if I don't know if revolution, but it's like a consciousness revolution. I am reminded of the sacred biblical thought spoken by the prophet Isaiah saying, "And the desert shall smile and blossom as the rose." Well, metaphorically speaking, what if aspects of our lives that appear to be deserted, whether it's through fear or anger, or any form of negativity. What if with the teaching of science of mind or other energizing spiritual principles, we could bring forth the blossoming of spiritual energy, where fear is transformed into faith, where desperation is transformed into inspiration, where turmoil is transformed into triumph. It's equivalent to this, Dr. Mark. 2 years ago, as my wife was transitioning, and I was kneeling over her face, and my tears was actually falling on her face, I suddenly heard an outburst that was so loud I didn't know it was coming from me. And I heard 3 times, "She is secure, she is secure, she is secure." And I stood up wondering who was that, because I didn't know this energetic proclamation was flowing within and from me. And as I stood up, the sentence was, "Lloyd, stop your crying. She is secure." And I wonder how we can communicate this truth to the universe. Stop the tears. May our tears become tears of gladness and joy, and not tears of fear and doom and disappointment. That would be my prayer, my proclamation, my acceptance, and what I see as the vast possibility for the teaching of the science of mind and spirit. Finally, as Ernest Holmes said, nothing has happened to the power since Jesus used it.
That's very, very beautiful. All very beautiful and inspiring. Is there anything I have not asked you about, or anything that you'd like to share in our concluding moments today?
Well, Dr. Mark, there are many things, but the one that I believe is so important, I mean, many are, but there are many, many aspects of this teaching that is applicable. For instance, when I started teaching in Compton, California in September 1980, I thought of Ernest Holmes' statement, "We are chemists in the laboratory of the mind. What shall we produce?" And I wanted to see if by applying a science of mind concept, we could see dramatic changes. And so I took this statement by Ernest Holmes that says, if we look at beauty long enough, we become more beautiful. I started taking a flower from my garden and placing it in a little cup 2 or 3 times per week and placing it on each child's desk. Then I took beautiful music. Here was the situation in this particular school, Roosevelt Elementary School, where I taught. Between Friday and Monday morning, 1 out of 5 students knew of someone who experienced gunshot trauma. And I thought, how am I going to teach math or social studies or reading when the mind of the child is absorbed with trauma? So I took that concept. If we look at beauty long enough, I started with beautiful flowers, beautiful music, and then I noticed when I would call the names of students for the roll call, their abruptness in answering, in my view, needed some attentiveness, like the boys would say, yeah. And so I would always sit in the silence early morning before I went to school. I was guided to write a list of words on the board, such as magnificent, marvelous, great, grand, glorious, possibilities, just a lot of words. And my guidance was, when your name is called, please select a word for the day and say, I am present. And my word for the day is, for example, gracious. And I asked them, my request is, whatever word you select, let's try to practice this word on the playground, during lunch period, on your way to school, and on your way from school. Dr. Mark, it worked so well after a period of time that on one occasion, the vice principal came in to observe my teaching skills. By the way, this was a vice principal who would, when I would say, good morning, he would say, what's so good about it? And I thought, oh boy, if the vice principal is saying that in the morning at 7:30, what are the students going to say? So I stopped saying good morning. I would just say, this is a grand day, and keep moving along without waiting for his responses. So fast forward, Dr. Mark, as he came in to observe that day, he sat in the back of the classroom for about 12 minutes, and then he stood up. Mr. Barrett, are you tranquilizing my kids? I thought, yes, with the power of Ernest Holmes' teachings. I never verbalized that, but there was such calmness, and I could say more, but number one, this teaching is applicable. Number two, it works. Number three, it ought to be sustained. And number four, it enriches the universe. And it's like a team, I would say, let's go win with science of mind and spirit teachings.
Very beautiful. Dr. Lloyd, thank you so much today for taking the time to share your wisdom. This has been a joy for me to listen to you and hear from you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mark. What a joy it is. Thank you for the opportunity, and may your good and the good of our movement be consistently manifested, maximized, and multiplied. Blessings to you.